Hello everybody and welcome back. I'm Count Christo and this is the Elites Dev Diary. We've recently, in the last couple of videos, we've learned about what countries are, what the characters are within those countries. Now, let's look about how those characters interact with the country and a little bit of how you as the ruler are going to see and interact with some of the characters in your country. And by you as a ruler, I mean you as the player and the state, because you're not exactly identified with the ruler. So, Elites, this is one of the more recent dev diaries. This came out today. Today, in fact. Yes, this is the one that got me back into recording some of these. So, elites, the power holders of society. Now, it's important to note that the elites are effectively groups of characters. Each country contains multiple elites, groups of characters with common socio-economic roles. While characters have their own individual personalities and goals, their collective behavior exerts a strong influence on the country's stability and power. Loyal elites can be leveraged, while disloyal elites can be dangerous. Makes perfect sense, right? So, how are they structured? They have binary, I have to assume, whether they exist or not, and then they have rights and obligations. So, presumably, rights, things that they get, obligations, things they have to do. Pretty simple. And again, somewhat recognizable from, say, M&T, but obviously this is in a character-driven environment, so it's very different. These laws only apply to tiles the country owns directly, which is interesting. So you don't set up elites in your vassals, even if they're kind of internal vassal type people like Bohemia within the Holy Roman Empire would have their own elite structures. As long as a country's laws dictate that elites should exist, which is why I think it's just a binary in terms of whether the elites exist. A fixed number of elite positions are created in every province of that country. So you have elite positions. Who is an elite are characters who are granted an elite position. At the start of the game, they're all occupied by existing characters, some historical characters, some procedurally generated. And if you have one of those positions, it comes with the ownership of buildings and specific rules for succession in terms of who's going to be the next holder of that position. Now, this is interesting. This means that characters, I think, don't own buildings themselves, technically. Some characters hold positions which entail ownership over some buildings, which is interesting. That's a significant divergence from 3.0. Obviously in 3.0, Mayo Taxes 3.0 that is, characters don't own it, but classes do kind of as one block. Whereas in this case, it seems that we have a class, a socioeconomic group. It's not really a class, but a group, like the military, for example. And the military doesn't own property. It's more correct to say that those with elite positions within the military own property. And then the holders of those positions make decisions about how to use their wealth from their property to change the world. And that's interesting. So let's look at an example. In the province of Brittany, there are 4 elite positions. There might be 4 elite positions for nobles. This means that we model the 4 most powerful noble characters and their families. These characters don't own buildings directly. Now, what's interesting about this means we model the foremost. I should probably ask for clarification on this, but does that mean they don't model any other families? So I don't really understand how characters could jostle for position. How does one of these families get replaced, for example? Can they be replaced from below? Or is that only a top-down? Because if they're only modeling the characters in these families, that's obviously quite different from modeling all of the nobles, but only counting 4 of them as elites and the ones that actually own property. So it's interesting. It could go either way on that. Yes, they don't own the buildings directly. It's tied to the position itself. So holdings are not diluted or lost on successions. And the same character can fill multiple positions in different elites. So you could be a Cardinal Wolsey, for example, to keep going with my Tudor examples, who was simultaneously a powerful elite within the clergy, but also effectively a powerful elite within the nobility in terms of he held lots of land, in entirely his role as a member of the clergy, but he was effectively also a very powerful noble. So you can kind of have that kind of branching out. Again, not a historian. Don't hate me too much if that's a bad summary of Cardinal Wolsey. The same character can fill multiple positions, yes. So a particularly successful merchant might petition you for a noble title, which is interesting. So I wonder what form those petitions take. Is it just a pop-up? Is it like them doing a scheme? Is this one of their goals that they're pursuing? It's interesting. Elite characters use the resources of their positions to further their goals, securing more favorable rights, lowering obligations, expanding existing holdings, or even attempting to carve out their own vassal country out of the province they reside in. Now that's really cool. So we've understood this part. Elite characters are going to pursue their own goals. Sure, they have lots of interesting goals, much more interesting and nuanced than in many other contexts, similar games that we've seen. And they can also even try and become a vassal. So that's really interesting. And that's something you might be willing to do, right? Like, let's say you're, again, I'm just going to keep using examples I know a little bit about, but let's say hypothetically you're England, okay? And you want, you've recently subjugated Wales in 1356. England already owned all of Wales, kind of. And owned is obviously questionable. But anyway, let's say, I'm pretty sure that's right. Let's say you've got Wales, right? But you don't really want to deal with Wales directly. So what you do is you give it to a local, noble or something. And then maybe you want them to become a little vassal country in Wales because you don't want to have some rebellious Welsh people of a different culture who are in your other elites, for example. You don't want them in your burghers. So you want to separate them out into a separate country that still remains a vassal. Could be really interesting. So let's take a look at all of the elites. Nobility, merchants, clergy, tribes, bureaucracy, and military. So should be no great surprise here. We've heard about all of these before. The nobility are hereditary landowners of the realm. They're the most powerful elite in 1356 by a wide margin. They tend to invest in rural buildings, owe feudal dues, and can raise levies, which can partly be utilized by the country itself. All pretty familiar stuff on the nobles, that makes sense. Merchants, I've been calling them burghers occasionally, but the game is now calling them merchants, fine. The engine of urban life responsible for handling trade, tend to invest in urban buildings, pay taxes and tariffs, can muster militias, which again can be made disposable to the state. The clergy, the representatives of the country's primary religion, depending on the country's investiture law. Clergy positions can be assigned by the head of the state, head of faith, state, or independently. Clergy can be assessed for taxes and can maintain militant clerical orders. Very cool, all makes sense. Tribes, we've heard about these, varying degrees of autonomy, can be made to pay tribute or participate in military campaigns. And then, one of the more interesting ones, the bureaucracy represents the state. For most countries in 1356, the bureaucrats are synonymous with one of the other elites. In other words, the bureaucracy starts as an elite beholden to others. The country's methods for recruitment can be reformed to create an independent bureaucracy, though this is far from easy. The bureaucrats can be paid varying wages, which significantly impacts their loyalty and propensity for corruption, and can be forced to extract taxation in different ways. So there's a lot packed in to that paragraph now, isn't there? They are synonymous with one of the other elites. What I read this to mean, and I hope I'm not wrong, is essentially if you were in, again, the UK, the bureaucrats are the nobles. Some of the nobles are also bureaucrats, and that's how your bureaucracy is run, because you don't have a concept of an independent bureaucracy. It's all just run by the nobility. I think that's what that means, which makes sense. So trying to split this out into a new means of recruitment, as opposed to just appointing, robber barons and the rights to tax farming to particular nobles and things like that. Trying to make it a separate thing, obviously, will grant the state greatly increased power and the nobles greatly diminished power, but it's not so easy to take power from a big elite like the nobles. The military elite is composed of top generals and admirals. Like the bureaucracy, the military starts off as an elite captured by another, most commonly the nobles. Makes perfect sense. But it too can be reformed into an independent elite with its own goals and priorities. There are various laws that configure the composition of the military elite. We'll explore those later on. Each elite character, those are the different elites. Let's look at how we interact with them. Each elite character can be interacted with individually. Okay, so you can raise a particular noble's levies or extract a greater tax from a particular merchant or as a group. And they will gain and lose favors accordingly. Favors are a decaying currency, which I assume means they're kind of like prestige if you have no gain per year in EU4, for example. So you gain 100 prestige, it's then going to decay away at 5 a year, something like that. I don't know. It calls it a decaying currency rather than an equilibrium currency, which I think is interesting. So maybe you can move where it decays to. So let's say it's a scale of 0 to 100. If you could make it so it decayed towards 50, by giving them favorable things elsewhere, that would be useful, right? Because that meant that you could tax somebody every 10 years, say, and then let it decay back up and then tax them, and etc. Again, an area that they need to be really careful about how you interact with it. It's not fun to go through and individually tax six merchants out of 10 to pick the 6 that are loyal. That's not and hugely enjoyable. You need to be able to systematize some of this stuff, but we haven't seen any of that, so we'll see when they get to it. They can be accumulated by either side, which is interesting. So you can get favors that someone owes you, but you can also owe someone favors. Elites will push whatever advantage they feel they are owed mercilessly within the confines of their personality. So if you raise a bunch of troops from a particular noble, they're probably going to want more land that you gained in that war you used their men for. I forgot to play my music. That's my bad. Which makes perfect sense, right? You've raised up men for a long time. They deserve something in return. Favors also have an important impact on character attributes, which in turn significantly impact their behavior. A character that is owed favors will turn increasingly hostile if they're denied the opportunity to use those favors. Leveraging estates by promising them future benefits might be a huge short-term gain, but can easily harm you in the long run. That makes perfect sense. Hostile elites can become a nuisance in two major ways. Firstly, they can form factions with various demands, from simple requests like lower taxes to major revamps of the laws and structure. Factions are a big topic, and they feed into rebellions and revolutions, so we'll talk about them later. Another way in which elite character can hinder your plans is by collaborating with your enemies. So there's an espionage system, again, going to be a future dev diary that we'll look at. But if they feel insulted or scorned or whatever, they're going to be more able to be bribed by your international enemies to maybe even join their side during a war, which is, important, especially when you have devolved militaries run by those very same elites. So here is an elite screen, and again, I'm not going to go too in on the UI. Being able to see 5 and then a plus 19, I don't like this potentially, but I can't interact with it, so I can't give proper feedback on it yet. I'll wait till I can interact with it. I like that they've laid it out such that you can see the relevant laws. That's what these icons are, to interact with a state, and an elite. I'm guessing these are the most powerful 5 within these particular elites. Yeah, the strongest characters in each elite. And you can see all members of an elite. In this case, all of these have exactly 24 people in each elite. That seems unlikely, right? So maybe this is just, work in progress. It seems unlikely that you'd have exactly 24 noble elites, merchant elites, and clergy elites in this, but yeah. Other than that, yeah, not too much to say here. These faces, by the way, maybe I was too harsh on the faces in the last video because they all looked quite similar. They were all children of the same person. These look much more disparate, which is, an improvement. And they talk about the mod ability. Bit of a shorter episode, this one, but those are the elites. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at religion as one of the major factors that's going to determine what characters think of each other and, what goals they have and how they strive out to do various different things. Link to the full dev diary and the playlist of other dev diary videos that I've made are in the description. Do take a look, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.